Hello, I'm producing this video because looking on YouTube you can find a great many examples of US AAF gun camera footage or Luftwaffe gun camera footage, and very little for the RAF. And what I very quickly realised is this is due to the very low quality of a large portion of RAF gun camera footage. So I'll start this video off by explaining why that is and what my goal is with this video with that in mind. So by and large, the point of gun cameras is to gather evidence of what exactly fighter pilots are shooting at and whether they're hitting, and so this can be checked against their combat reports. So general policy with the RAF was that all aircraft were fitted with gun cameras, specifically the G45, which you see in this video. The US AAF, by comparison, fitted all aircraft with quite high quality gun cameras, whilst the Luftwaffe generally did not carry gun cameras on their aircraft. It only specifically fitted them on a few aircraft. In the case of the Luftwaffe, it seems like this was mostly to generate propaganda material rather than to actually verify any kill claims. So I'll now read a brief excerpt from an RAF paper written in regards to the 2nd Tactical Air Force operations in Europe in 1944 and 1945, which does apply for the rest of the war, as you'll see. When the cinefilms were developed and returned to the wing, it was customary for the wing commander flying to show the films to all pilots, compare them with the actual combat report, and criticise range, length of bursts, and accuracy of shooting. Unfortunately, the films produced by this type of camera in use were generally of such poor quality that it made this task practically impossible, and on most films all that could be seen was a dark blur on a greyish scratched background. Even at the end of the war, the Spitfires were carrying a camera which only took 14 frames per second as compared to the camera fitted on American fighters, which took 72 frames per second. Furthermore, on the British camera there was no override fitted. Consequently, the best cannon strikes at the end of combat were never seen. Many of these problems are even worse with early war gun camera footage, and here's a few examples of how bad they can be. So why am I trying to comb through this footage to find some of the higher quality examples? Well, 1942 is a very difficult year for fighter command. They're forced to stay on the offensive against the Germans using the FW-190 with their older Spitfire Mark 5s. The conditions are just not in their favour for it, and yet they keep having to go up there and fight the Germans over France. And I think a lot of this gun camera footage can give insight into what was going wrong and why they were having so much trouble. I'll also add that the majority of the combat over the Channel was against JG2 and JG26 of the Luftwaffe. Now, it's quite easy to do research and find out exactly which aircraft are being lost by these units, so I can actually link a large portion of this footage to individual German aircraft being shot down. Just to quickly list where I'm getting this information, so the Fighter Command War Diaries by John Foreman, JG26 War Diary by Donald Caldwell, JG2 Chronicles by Eric Monberg, and some online archives for RAF Squadron records. I'd like to say thanks also to the IWM for the footage you see in this video, which is all from their archives, and also to Storyteller with some help researching, since I neither have the JG2 book nor speak German, which it's in. So all that said, let's start with some footage. So this first clip's interesting for several reasons. Firstly, it was taken during the Channel Dash, so this is when the German battleships ran from the French-occupied ports through the English Channel back to Germany, and the RAF mounted several operations to try and stop them. And this was by the 401 Squadron, and they were sent to try and escort some swordfish, and they never found the swordfish, so they carried out a sweep towards France, and they ran into some 190s from JG26. And the interesting thing with this clip is this is actually claimed as a Bf-109E damage. There were still pilots who were looking at the squared off wingtips, not recognising that it was an FW-190 they were fighting, not one of the older Bf-109s. You can see the 190 very quickly performs a defensive role and then dives away, and the Spitfire simply can't get shots at him. And this is very much standard tactics for the Germans, and is what a large portion of this gun camera footage looks like. Experienced German pilots flying the FW-190 were very difficult targets for RAF pilots, and this is why so few of them were shot down during the year. So jumping ahead a bit to March, you can see this is footage of a crippled 109 with one of the undercarriage legs stuck down. You can't really see any hits, but it's clear this aircraft has been damaged. This is interesting because you see here it's definitely a 109E. There's some bracing for the tail, and at this point Jägerschwader 2 was entirely flying 109Fs. The reason this is a 109E is this is actually a German trainee pilot from Jagdschule 5. Apparently there was a bit of uncertainty among the Germans as to what exactly had happened to the two trainee pilots who went missing on this day, but it seems clear from this footage they were caught by Spitfires and shot down. So this is footage from Operation Circus number 116 from number 129 Squadron, and it's the first one where I can positively identify the victim. This is the Staffel captain of the 6th Staffel of JG-26, Oberleutnant Otto Behrens, who bailed out whilst flying alone over the Somme estuary after being attacked by Pilot Officer Armstrong. This is some more footage from 129 Squadron from the next day. You can see though the title card identifies this as a 190. This is actually a BF 109 from the first group of JG2. The overall attack here is quite good and shows a diving attack profile with some traces being visible towards the end just before the hits are made. There's quite a solid hit on the radiator here, and you see it starts streaming coolant, which explains why this aircraft was forced to perform an emergency landing. This is some more footage from 41 Squadron, who featured earlier. The clip most likely shows the aircraft of Unteroffizier Janke Heinz from the first group of Jägerschwader 2, who was shot down and killed on this date. JG2 had several aircraft hit by enemy fire today, but Heinz was the only pilot killed, and it seems like this explosion was likely the cause. As to the exact nature of the explosion, I'm unsure. There was no visible damage before it, and it could either be a fuel or ammo explosion. The footage cuts the very instant of the explosion, presumably out of film. This kind of thing is why so little of this footage actually has any damage visible on the enemy aircraft. Simply, a lot of the firing was not recorded. I've included this clip as it was shot by Brendan Finucane, who was one of the preeminent aces of the RAF during this period. The Kenley Wing performed a fighter sweep and encountered aircraft as a third group of JG-26. Neither group claimed any kills. However, 602 claimed a couple of damage, including this clip. JG-26 certainly reported no damage. Finucane's combat report includes analysis of the camera footage, only part of which appears to have survived here. Finucane was himself damaged during this combat, but returned his Spitfire to base and it was later repaired. The aircraft in the photograph you're seeing, serial number BM124, was the actual aircraft used on this sortie by Finucane. This is some more footage from that same sortie by 602. You see a 190 being pursued to the sea and fired on repeatedly. Again, JG-26 didn't report any damaged aircraft in this engagement. The general standard of RAF gunnery improved drastically later in the war. This was a big part of the problem in 1942. RAF pilots simply were not hitting the target often enough. I believe that many pilots did not even know what it would look like if they had hit the enemy aircraft, and this is part of why the RAF overclaim rate during this period approached 5 claims for every enemy aircraft actually shot down. This footage is from a Polish squadron engaged in a rodeo fighter sweep. On this mission, the Tangmere wing was badly battered and lost several Spitfires, the second group of JG-26. The Polish fighter squadrons of the Norfolk wing climbed up to engage. Between them, they claimed 5 aircraft destroyed, 4 probably destroyed, and 3 damaged, including the one in this video. 2 German pilots were actually killed when their 190s were shot down, and it's possible more were damaged, but this is still a significant overclaim. Note the close formation of the German pilots. They've clearly been caught by surprise while still in an attack formation. This is footage from another 602 operation. Flying as part of a fighter sweep, Finucane spotted FW-190s beneath them and dived to attack. These were bait, and other German fighters came down on them. Finucane ordered a defensive circle, and then eventually the RAF fighters broke off and returned to England with no loss. 1 German had been killed. Curiously, the first group was supposed to be flying all FW-190s about this point. However, this is clearly a BF 109. It seems that as the last group to convert to the new aircraft, they may still have had some 109s in service this late in April. So this is a short clip from Circus number 124. You see a 190 very clearly in view. Spitfire drops into pursuit. There you see a cannon strike on the wing. Newton pursued this aircraft all the way to the French coast, and his report mentions several more strikes occurring on the enemy aircraft as he continued to fire. It's difficult to link this to an actual Luftwaffe loss. 2 190s were shot down today, but this aircraft was only claimed as a probable, and it seems the 190s shot down were by another squadron. Otherwise, JG-26 reported no damage. It's possible that this aircraft was damaged and then shot down by another squadron. Not all aircraft damage were actually reported by JG-26 if they could be repaired in the field. However, a hit to the inner wing like this would require significant attention. It's also worth noting that again the footage cuts off early. This is some of the absolute best footage I've seen. It's an FW-190 being attacked on Operation Rodeo 18. It seems the initial high deflection shots at the start of the video must have been successful because the 190 has taken damage and has a gear leg stuck down. As the clip goes on, more hits are made. At some point, the 190's canopy is jettisoned. Here, what looks a great deal like a human figure comes out from the cockpit. This raised quite the mystery for me because neither JG2 nor JG-26 reported any losses on this day. However, Newton's report states that this was the flying helmet of the German pilot, and it seems likely that this was a FW-190 which barely landed at St. Omer with significant damage. So this is some strafing. The vast majority of RAF gun camera footage is actually strafing, but I've not included much in this video. This is very good footage of a hurricane attack though. You can see what seems to be a near miss with a bomb near the ship. The pilots of 175 reported this as a German minesweeper which was so badly damaged they believed it must have sunk. The Hurricane was no longer useful as a fighter in Western Europe and basically retired from that role in 1941. But the fitting of bombs, cannons and rockets transformed the Hurricane into a potent ground attack aircraft. This is a very brief clip from Ramrod number 33 to below. You can see a cannon strike on the tail of this FW-190. Two FW-190s from JG-26 force landed with combat damage today, and this seems to be one of them. Quite a gruesome detail from the report is that this aircraft was originally claimed as a probable. However, the Spitfire returned to base with blood smeared on its nose. On this basis, it was upgraded to a destroyed claim. JG-26 records do not mention a wounded pilot on this day. This is footage from Circus number 195. All these clips are from the same dogfight by 222 Squadron. Sergeant Ogden, whose clip you see now, fired on a 190. Wing Commander Scott Malden of the North Weld Wing then also fired on the FW-190. They watched it crash into the sea and claimed it as a shared destroyed. This was the aircraft of Georg Grafenius from the 2nd Staffel of JG-26 who was killed. This footage is clearly of a Spitfire, and I very much hope that this is someone following their leader into an attack rather than firing on a friendly. These clips are quite low quality, but it's of a very interesting incident, and I was surprised to see it when looking through the footage. The Staffel captain of the 2nd Staffel of KGR 106, Hauptmann Hans Bergermann, was convinced that it was possible to carry out a low-level daylight bombing raid using their Ju-88s against the UK. His plan was that two aircraft would take off from Brest on the western French coast, fly up the Irish Sea, cross the UK north of Wales, and then return to bases in the Netherlands. This plan required the Ju-88s to run on a single engine for a portion of the flight in order to conserve fuel. It's fair to say that this plan was very sketchy. The planned target was to be the de Havilland Airscrew Factory, however the bombers never found this and instead dropped their bombs on various towns and villages. About two-thirds of the way across the UK, they were intercepted by 4 aircraft from 303 Squadron, which was being rested in the north of England at this point. As you might expect from the Poles of Battle Britain fame, they made quick work of the bombers, shooting both down. Here you see the burning wreckage of Bergermann's aircraft. This photograph shows the victorious pilots of 303 Squadron with the tail of Bergermann's aircraft. So this is footage of a Ju-88 being attacked and shot down near Bolthead by a 310 Squadron Spitfire. This aircraft is from the 3rd Staffel of Aufklärungsgruppe 123. Though no strikes are visible in the recording, the pilot manages to record the wreckage of the crashed Ju-88, confirming the kill. Many people stopped thinking about German bombers after the end of the Battle of Britain. However, many were still being used on anti-shipping operations and nuisance raids into 1942. This film is from a sweep carried out by the Ibbsley Wing. Near Cherbourg, they spotted 3 FW-190s, and 66 Squadron went to engage. This FW-190 seems to be leaking some kind of fluid. 66 claimed a damaged and a destroyed. I'm not sure which one of those two this one is. Jacob Augustin from the 7th Staffel of JG2 was missing in action at the time of this combat and was most certainly shot down by 66 Squadron. This is footage from the Dieppe raid, where mostly Canadian troops were landed in the French port of Dieppe. The associated air battle was massive, with around 50 RAF fighter squadrons against the 18 Staffels of JG2 and JG26, along with the bombers of KG2 and KG40. The forces committed to this tiny parcel of French airspace represented the vast majority of those available in both France and Britain. In the end, the Luftwaffe lost almost 50 aircraft, half of them bombers, and the RAF lost almost 100, about 70 of those being Spitfires. This is 331 Norwegian Squadron, second sortie of the day. Lieutenant Semon Weistein claimed a Dornier shared damage, which you see in this video. Cannon strikes are visible on the isolated bomber, which then begins violent evasive maneuvers. Despite the disparity in overall casualties, Luftwaffe escort of the medium bombers was ineffective. These formations were broken up and inflicted little damage for quite heavy losses. Note the wingtip vortices here, showing the aircraft maneuvering on the edge of a stall. This is another clip from the hard-working Norwegians, this time number 332 Squadron. Unfortunately, the quality of most Dieppe footage is quite poor, however cannon strike is visible in some frames. Ericsson claimed a probable and a destroyed on this date, and this seems to match his claim for destroyed most closely. The aircraft was observed to crash into the sea with a huge splash. This is some more Dieppe footage. Mauer spotted 2 Dornier 217s and began to climb up to them. You can just about make the second aircraft out in some of these frames. It took a long time to close from directly behind. Once he closed to firing range, he held down the trigger, observing white smoke, which can be seen just at the end of the video. He broke away with ammunition expended and claimed a DOE 217 damage. Well, that's it for the 1942 footage which I have. I'd like to try and draw a few conclusions from what we've seen here. Firstly, very little good RAF gun camera footage exists from this period. This is mostly a result of the poor quality of the equipment used, which cannot capture proof of kills even when German aircraft definitely went down. Despite this, RAF claiming for all these gun camera clips is quite modest and accurate. It seems that the more egregious overclaiming occurred when film was not carried and the RAF pilots could not check their memories, formed in moments of extreme fear, stress, excitement and adrenaline against the more reliable camera footage. It must also be said that there are at least a few cases of aircraft suffering quite significant damage which are not reported in German records. Overall, I think a large portion of the RAF's problems in 1942 can be pinned on inadequate gunnery training and the low amount of ammunition carried by the Spitfire Mark 5B. I'd like to thank you for watching if you made it to this point in the video. I may produce some more videos like this based on footage from different points in the war if there's enough interest. You'll find a lot of the sources which I use linked in the description of this video. Have a good day.